Hi, I'm Liz, a Kaplan MCAT instructor. Are you ready to reinforce some of the knowledge that you need for test day in the Psych-Soc portion of the MCAT? If so, you're in the right place because in this short video, we're going to take a quick look at some of the associative learning content you need. We're going to get started by taking a look at some of the terms that are used within associative learning in the context of a scenario, kind of like an experiment you might see on the exam. We'll make sure that you're able to identify the different components of an operant learning paradigm, and we're also going to make sure that going forward, you're able to predict how a behavioral training schedule might work out. So let's get started. Take a moment to carefully review the given scenario. In reviewing the experiment, you probably noticed that there were several different aspects involved in the training of the pigeon. In order to fully understand experiments of this type on test day, you'll need to be able to consider each conditioner and its associations separately. A logical start to any associative learning problem is to consider the potential behavioral outputs and how the consequences of those behaviors will affect future performance. The experiment had two possible behaviors for the pigeon: press blue button and press green button. The consequences involved in associative learning fall into a few simple categories. This prompt asks about what makes the blue button both positive reinforcement and positive punishment. Both of these consequences use positive as a descriptor. Positive in the context of associative learning means addition of a stimulus in response to the given behavior. What were the two things added to the situation when the pigeon pressed the blue button? Both food and shock were consequences of pressing the blue button. You would expect the addition of food to increase the behavior of pressing the blue button. Any consequence that increases a behavior is called a reinforcement. Thus, you can say that pressing the blue button is a positively reinforced behavior due to the food added. However, there was another consequence to pressing the blue button: addition of shock. You would expect shock to decrease the pigeon's desire to press the blue button. Any consequence that reduces the likelihood of a behavior is called a punishment. So, the addition of shock makes the blue button a positive punishment as well. It would be really tough to predict the pigeon's behavior with just the blue button, as it is both rewarded and punished with every press if it presses the blue button alone. However, the blue button was not the only possible behavior in this scenario. In this prompt, the green button is referred to as negative. In behavioral conditioning, negative means that something is removed from the situation. In this case, what did the green button remove? It removed shock. You would expect that not getting shocked would increase the pigeon's likelihood of pressing the blue button. As we already learned, a consequence that increases the likelihood of a behavior is a reinforcement. Overall, this makes pressing the green button a negatively reinforced behavior. One example we didn't get a look at in this scenario was a negative punishment, the removal of something to decrease a behavior. Negative punishments can also be thought of as a penalty. For example, had there been another button that removed food from the cage, that would be a negative punishment. Next, we'll consider the consequence scheduling in the original scenario. The food aspect of the blue button consequence set is considered to be variable interval. Interval schedules have some time period in which the consequence is unavailable regardless of the behavior of the pigeon. After that time period is up, behavior, pressing the blue button, will once again give reward, or food. Variable simply means that the time period for the interval schedule is not a set time value, but rather can be any time within a range of values. As the scenario said that food would be available after a period of 5 to 55 seconds, the food reward qualifies as being given on a variable interval schedule. Now let's turn to the green button's reinforcement schedule. This prompt states that the green button is on a fixed ratio schedule. How is ratio defined for associative learning paradigms? Ratio simply means that there is a required number of behavioral responses before the consequence is given. In this case, the behavior is pressing the green button, meaning that it must be pressed some number of times before the shock is turned off. Fixed means that the number of behavioral responses required for the consequence is always the same. For the pigeon, the ratio required was 1 press of the green button to disarm the shock. Let's also review a couple of possibilities that didn't come up in the pigeon example. A fixed interval schedule would be a consequence received for a behavior after a set time period, such as a paycheck, which is available once per 2 weeks at a set time. A variable ratio schedule would be a consequence received after some changing number of responses, which is actually one of the most addictive aspects of gambling. While there is an average number of plays required to win, the actual required number of behaviors for a reward varies from attempt to attempt in variable ratio schedules. When we consider the overall scenario, it is clear the pigeon will eventually learn some ideal way to press the buttons to maximize reinforced behaviors and minimize the punished ones. How will the pigeon ultimately press the green button? It should learn to start any behavioral pattern with the green button so that it isn't shocked by the blue button. How will it learn to press the blue button? The blue button should be pressed repeatedly because the pigeon does not know how long the variable interval will last for any given consequence set due to the schedule we used for food reward. So it will push the button to check for reward until it eventually does receive the food reward after the interval is up. At this point, it should press the green button again to avoid shock and continue the same behavioral pattern indefinitely, or at least until it is full. In this lesson, you learned how to recognize a lot of the terms that are associated with behavioral learning. You also learned how to actually apply those terms within a paradigm so that on test day, you'll be able to look at a brand new experiment and figure out what exactly the behavior output should be based on a training schedule, be it ratio, interval, or some combination. Make sure to practice this before your next practice test so that you're able to master this technique for test day.